I'm with James and Clea from Deep. Welcome to Potato Head. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
It's a real pleasure. It's actually the first time you're around, so it's kind of like I'm super excited to host you. And to be honest, I don't remember exactly how I found out about Deep. So it's kind of like, I think I found it through Instagram somewhere. Maybe it's like GR10K or like Amateur Global or one of your other projects. I'm not sure like what popped, but I remember the aesthetic. For me, it was just like what caught my eye first. I was just like, this is sick. Like it's just like exciting without being really sure what it is. It's kind of unclear.
Yeah, connecting over like global dark ecologies via Eden Power Corp.
Yeah. exactly. So it's kind of like there's an aesthetic sensibility that was just like, this is clearly for me, but I was trying to figure out like, what is it like exactly do you do with that project? So maybe we can start from there. Like, what's Deep?
Yeah, look, I think from that lens that you picked up on, this kind of aesthetically driven representation of ecology and biodiversity is something that we're being drawn to. Effectively, Deep is a biodiversity organization. So our thing is investigating biodiversity through a contemporary lens. And by biodiversity, we mean the mix and volume of biological life on planet Earth. So animals, plants, but also ecosystems, and the diversity of those ecosystems and biological life, but also the interactions and the complexity and diversity of interactions, both in terms of food web and in terms of ecosystem engineering that occurs. So that's what biodiversity is, and for us it's really the foundation of evolution of life on Earth. The more diversity that we have in terms of environment is the more pressure and the more niches that can evolve in terms of plant life and animal life. And it's that diversity that led to the evolution of humans and life as we know it on the planet, and which is also what's leading to the evolution of the current state of the environment, because I guess humans are just another biological actor on Earth, even though we
clearly part of the
hierarchy ourselves. We nonetheless are a biological factor in the same way, that we view technology as a form of biological evolution in a very clunky state now, but we're just wetware and super advanced biological tech. As we look at emerging synthetic biology, it's quite clear that biological systems are a form of technology.
I was going to go there. Yeah.
So, the technology we have around us in terms of light, electricity, grids, computers, recording devices at the moment are just a very early evolution of what could become a biological wetware. So biodiversity for us is so critical, not only for the preservation of the beauty of life on Earth, which for us provides some of the most incredible and amazing experiences that we've had and that we think humanity has had collectively, but also to preserve that biodiversity as a form of data for future generations and evolutions to be able to evolve off and from. So that's why we focus on biodiversity. And for Deep, we started under cover of COVID in 2020, and our first 2 or 3 years was really about a hotbed of experimentation to understand all of these diverse stakeholders from NGOs.
So you started like 2020, but before you go into the old journey, so it's kind of like, why did we start 2020, and like, why did you just want it to start Deep? Like, what's the genesis of it?
Well, Clea and I met, and that was really the genesis of wanting to embark on a large-scale kind of life project. And looking at both of our individual histories and finding the best allocation of our, capacities and resources mixed with our value systems. And the value systems obviously aligned towards an appreciation of biodiversity, as explained, and also wanting to engage and
a mix of capacity and values blended together.
Exactly, and also like wanting to act within a cultural capacity, which is, a really strong suit of Clea's background.
Deep projects support and celebrate biodiversity, and we'd felt at that time that we could come in both from a curatorial, I mean, we both have a background in different ways in curationship, and we felt as though that there were people, projects, stories that needed better amplification, needed support, needed to be brought together, and that was our initial entryway into Deep. Since then, the organization has evolved into creating products and creating projects which we're driving in a much heavier way, but the start had been, okay, we see opportunity to be successfully either bringing capital or to be bringing attention to projects which we saw weren't getting the right amount of support.
Yeah, I think because that's the thing that like caught my eye is it's packaged in a really different way, because there's so many organizations that are doing amazing work, but a lot of them I'm never gonna stumble upon them, and I'm pretty sure a lot of like the customers and clients, like people that are part of the Potato Head family, they would also never see it. But you have a part that is like clearly consumer facing, where like I can see it and understand that it's like somehow it's for me.
Yeah.
And like
part of our role is to be translators in that way, and our early conversations with some of the world's best people working in biology, whether that's ecological biology or synthetic biology, working with people doing incredible field work.
Whether it's NGOs on the ground with their boots in the mud, or scientists working out of Texas, data scientists or research lab scientists, really diverse stakeholders in that way.
Yeah, and thinking about previously to Deep, I'd been working at Nike, where my role was to help create a platform for people within the fashion, design, cultural institutions, and in some ways mapping who those individuals were to have the massive support of Nike to amplify those voices. One of our initial actions was, how can we be doing that for the scientific and ecological community, and to be amplifying some of those voices as well.
I think that's where we really connect with Potato Head, and it's kind of like just like me personally on the same level. It's kind of like, how do we take these things that we value so much, like our passion projects, and we try to integrate it within culture. It's like using like other like leverage.
That's right, and the cultural aspect, as Clea mentioned, has this incredible amplification capacity. So how do we get in front of eyeballs? How do we use those, advanced marketing and pattern recognition tactics of a Nike, of an Apple, but put them towards the wonder of biodiversity to educate, enthrall, and create intimacy with ecology for those collective audiences?
Yeah, whether that's a Milan Design Week, or whether that's an ID magazine, or whether that's a Potato Head radio station, these are all platforms for extraordinary amplification to an audience who might not otherwise have the opportunity.
And culture also has incredible resources in terms of creativity and individuals. So a lot of the projects that we've done have not only leveraged the amplification power of the cultural industry as a whole, but also leveraged the capacity of hyper-creative individuals within culture. For example, working with Sabine Marcellus to design an enclosure to be a full life cycle enclosure for praying mantis research, which we deployed in the Amazon last year. So how can we create design solutions to empower biodiversity research, which also bring the cultural amplification to it as well?
Yeah. Can you explain just a little bit more about that project? Because like this is one that's like really exciting, and at the same time I personally don't know much about it. So it's kind of like I saw it, I know the visual aspect of it, I think I understand it, but it's kind of like maybe having more details about it.
Yeah, that sounds like a common comment on Deep projects.
Everything.
But because the reality is the projects that we do are so complex, because we're drawing together commercial stakeholders, cultural stakeholders, creative stakeholders, in this case a designer, Sabine Marcellus, also NGOs, indigenous communities and local communities that are on the ground in hyper remote areas, and government organizations as well, to actually leverage what we do into real world biodiversity action. So the Sabine Marcellus project, ExoPack, we've been working with a group of insect researchers. Specifically for this project, we're working with a group called Projecto Mantis. They're a Rio-based praying mantis research group, and they're really incredible. They're at the forefront of a new methodology for scientific inquiry in the field. So traditionally, with regards to insect collection in the field, it's about going in, oftentimes putting poisons into the environment. Insects drop from the canopies of trees. They're collected. The dead insects are taken back to the lab, and research is done on the dead bodies.
Oh.
Whereas these guys and an emerging group of like-minded researchers are starting to look at full life cycle observation and analysis of insects. So that means collecting live samples during weeks, if not months-long fieldwork missions in hyper-remote areas, collecting, storing these insects for weeks or months at a time in field labs, then transporting them via air back to city-based laboratories and observing them over the course of their full life cycle. In the case of the praying mantis, 2.5 to 3 years from juvenile to death. So that means observing the birth from seed pods of praying mantis, adolescence, all of their shedding, their emergence, mating behaviors, feeding behaviors, and death behaviors as well. So these researchers have been very under-resourced and using literally Tupperware containers for this collection, transportation, and observation. So we were able to, and this is where the curation aspect of what we do comes in. One of the most beautiful things that we get to do is respond to these types of needs and do it creatively. So we went to Sabine and spoke with her about creating a design brief essentially for a capsule hotel for praying mantis.
But that's what it looks like. Like, it looks so good. It's kind of like, it's the kind of object that you would like to have at home.
Yeah.
But that's a tool to capture praying mantis.
Exactly, and it's also such a strong validation, and a lot of the outcome of one of the indirect outcomes of what we do is validating the work that often gets unseen within the environmental space. So
it's very unrewarding work often, scientific work or field work in general. There's nothing sexy about it. Vogue's not doing a cover shoot.
Yeah, exactly. So to be able to bring this type of design value into the work that would otherwise be unseen is such a boost for what people on the ground are doing, whether it's researchers, whether it's ranger programs that we're working with in North Sumatra, to be able to give them kit, to be able to work with them in really unique ways and validate.
Because you're doing so many projects. So let's go back just a little bit to the start. So we talked about how you've met and kind of what was the start of it, your past. But what was the first projects of Deep? Because I think you spent a lot of time in the jungle as starts of really going into the ground, just in the ground, groundwork. So
I think that's a good point, because while we focus on these cultural outcomes and cultural narratives, or inserting biodiversity and environmentalism into cultural narratives, it's always rooted in real world action. So when we started, it was about experimentation, network building. I'd already spent quite a bit of time in some really remote jungles, and through that had started to build networks. Our first major project, we started to think about what is conservation, and as you said, a lot of people are doing really great things out there, but you won't come across them because they're not contextualized within a cultural space. And a lot of conservation is green and brown, and in terms of its aesthetic and in terms of the way that it presents itself, and is a kind of early 2000s aesthetic, because they're focused on the real important work on the ground, as they should be. So they don't have time to focus on granular user experience, or working with Swiss graphic designers to make these things digestible or intriguing in a new type of way for a new type of audience. But for us, we don't use the word conservation, and we certainly don't use the word sustainability. That's not part of the paradigm for us. Conservation is like a return to nature. There is no return to nature. I've spent 3 weeks in terms of plane flights, boat trips, and on foot to get to hyper remote areas. And you're there, and then you go into a local community of 120 people on the Amazon River in the Juruá, and there's a flat screen TV that's being powered by solar panels.
Yeah.
So
this is gone.
It's gone, and it's about how, and as I said earlier, technology is a form of biology for us, or is becoming a form of biology as it advances. AI is biological thinking in a way, or trying to replicate biological thinking. And so there is no return. How do we foster a beneficial evolution with biodiversity, with the rawer forms of nature that still exist? These were the questions that were grappling us when we started to develop our first projects, which were around both enabling local communities on the ground in the Juruá, in the Western Brazilian Amazon, and also we were doing quite a lot of work in North Sumatra, which is a place that I've been going to since 2015.
So the first start was like the Amazon and Indonesia.
Yeah.
So like that was like really the first project.
Where are the wildest jungles in the world that have the greatest degree of intact biodiversity? And then how can we find out more about that? So we started to introduce bioacoustic, which is basically just audio recording, and visual system, which is basically just camera recording systems in these areas. So setting camera traps to see what's in these areas, taking big recordings of large surveyed swaths of land in particular areas of interest, taking, in the case of the project that we're doing here, we've taken 370,000 minutes of audio recording from the buffer zones of the Larose ecosystem in North Sumatra. And we did this over a survey area that included, 67 individual survey sites, all within the buffer zones of the national park. National parks are great, they're protected, and oftentimes, especially relatively small national parks like North Sumatra, are relatively protected and safe. There's not a lot of poaching that encroaches into them. But the friction is where these wild biodiverse areas meet human intervention. So the buffer zones, which are often heavily fragmented, heavily extracted, so in the case of North Sumatra with the palm oil industry. So how do we negotiate these spaces were the questions we were asking.
But so when you do like the bio recording, what's the objective of that exactly? Like what's the purpose of it?
Yeah, exactly. So there are impact-driven purposes, which are things like looking for endangered or species that haven't been previously seen. There, and that can help our partners on ground achieve grants, funding, larger areas of land. That can be a quite successful methodology for that. There are other types of scientific benefits that come out of that impact. Then there are cultural things that can come out of it. It can be a great way to create an intimacy with ecology from these sorts of recordings, that they're very emotive. So there's a range of both kind of,
To speak really directly to the impact metrics, because they're really important, it's different for each project. So we've done bioacoustic surveys in the Juruá, which was about proving the value of community-led fisheries management of the arapaima, the world's largest scaled fish.
They're big.
They're really big. They're like 200 kilograms. There's amazing photos of guys with these fish over their shoulders, struggling to walk through water. They're from another time. They're prehistoric, and their populations are being decimated as a result of commercial overfishing. Our NGO partners on the ground have, over the last 10 years, been implementing strategies for community-led management of this resource extraction. So they do counts in the dry season to understand exactly how many fish are left. Then they only fish between 15 and 30% of that quota. And over the course of the last 10 years, in community protected areas, this fish has increased its numbers by over 425%, an amazing outcome. There'd always been the idea that community protection of these lakes was having an impact on the terrestrial biodiversity around these lakes.
And that's the part that's so hard to measure, right? So you have like that theory in mind, or just like, I'm pretty sure that if we take care of these fish, the rest is going to be better. But how do you track that?
And
I think that's where you come in.
Completely.
Right?
The local communities had the inclination that this was happening just by their sensibility of the land.
And you feel it.
So we went there and did surveys of the areas surrounding community protected lakes and the areas surrounding non-community protected lakes, and in that case it was over 1 million minutes of audio collected, and then we run AI algorithms over the top of all of this audio, and these algorithms do pattern matching to pick out individual species, so we can understand exactly what species are operating in these different territories, how these species are interacting, are these species endangered, are these species critically endangered and threatened, and also do soundscape analysis to understand that earlier thing of what is biodiversity. It's the interaction between species as well over the course of a day, a month, a season.
Would that be possible without like these AI pattern recognition?
No, absolutely not. I mean, how could a human go through 1 million minutes of recording?
That's the thing. That's crazy, right? It's like the amount of data that's required to be able to do the work you're doing now requires that new advanced technology, and a lot of the time that would be used in not of the best way for humanity. But I think like one of the things you're doing right now is using these tools that we see as scary in a lot of time, but applied for like a better future somehow. Like that's the impression that I have. I'm not sure like what's your take on it, but
completely. I mean, beneficial AI is like a big term that gets used in the AI industry at the moment, because there is a lot of perception that AI is having a negative impact or can potentially have a negative impact on humanity. And beneficial AI is certainly the scope in which we're inhabiting. So deploying AI for these purposes, historically, to do these types of surveys, it was an intern sitting in the jungle for 2 hours a week with a clipboard, noting down what they saw. I mean,
Jane Goodall vibe.
Yeah.
It's very romantic.
And Jane Goodall is certainly one of the most successful examples of this type of inquiry, and took it was almost a once in a generation kind of success story and pioneering success story, and in a time when the habitat was far less fragmented than it is now, although there was a lot of habitat fragmentation going on at that time as well. But there's far less integrity of human observational data available, and often human-led observation is about one specific species. In the case of the praying mantis, we're not doing AI analysis on that. That's human-led observation and using design to empower human-led observation.
Yeah, that's a really different project.
Whereas AI is about understanding the complexities of soundscapes and species interaction. In the Juruwa, we identified 360 plus individual species. In the survey in Sumatra, we identified over 75 individual species in the buffer zones of the national park, not even within the national park. 22 of those were critically endangered species. So even that information, as you were saying, drives conservation efforts, where we put our attention, how we direct human development in these buffer zones. Let's move roads further out of the buffer zones, because these soundscapes prove that any proximity to roads, even dirt roads, and small human activity has a big impact on the complexity of the soundscapes.
Kind of like prove all these theories that you could have in mind that is kind of like almost impossible to prove otherwise. And I think like this specific project like really ties in with what like we're doing here as a project with you. So it's kind of like talk about like these soundscapes and like how it can like also translate into like having a better appreciation for it for like regular folks. I think like that's what we're doing right now. So can you talk a little bit more about like this specific project we're doing with Potato Head right now, so kind of like the takeover of the sound system for the past 2 days?
Yeah, so we've been doing a residency here, and through that we've been able to use these recordings that we took specifically in Sumatra, which is part of the Indonesia, where we are currently in Bali, and through the recording systems and speakers in all of the incredible spaces here, we've infiltrated this audio. So replaced the kind of ambient soundtracks that exist in this space with these audio recordings from the Sumatran jungle, as a way to kind of connect to people's primordial brains and reptilian brains in a subversive kind of way, because you don't pick up on it at first. Maybe it is the insect and bird life already here, but it's actually an echo of the past of what was here 50, 100 years ago, when Bali was a truly wild island. It was only 70 years ago that the last Balinese tiger was thought to have disappeared from the island of Bali, and now we're talking about protecting the last 200 Sumatran tigers through these types of programs in Sumatra.
That's a powerful symbol, like the tiger of Bali, because we had the discussion before, but tigers of Bali and tigers of Sumatra kind of like linking this as a symbol of the biodiversity that is disappearing. I think it's a powerful symbol. And
really?
It is. And people, absolutely, people arrive in Bali for the extraordinary environments that exist here. You know, they're here to enjoy the sea and the mountains and the greenery and the wildlife in Bali, and coming to an environment like Potato Head. You walk through, it's such a seamless, beautiful environment, but it can also make you dream, and it can bring to life a sensitivity with the environment that we're trying to capture as well. So whilst people can enjoy themselves here, we're inviting them to take just 1 or 2 levels to go
just
deeper.
a little bit deeper.
That was a good one. But to go a little bit deeper to try and connect with some of the environmental possibilities that we can see in the future as well. As James said, there's no return, but there's certainly an exciting future that we're trying to encourage through a lot of our work.
And that specific audio, because you were saying like maybe it's going to take a while, but yesterday I was walking around, and then at one point I was like, oh, it's so wild in that bush. But that was just the audio. Like I thought it was real for 1 second. And when I first listened to like other parts of clips, are not the one that we're using right now, because I don't think it was from the same area. The clips that you first sent me was not from Indonesia, but it was so wild. It was so intense. Like it's really magic. Like I really want to hear like that specific clip like elsewhere for another project. Like it's really intense. But the one that we have here is like way more subtle. It feels like it's part of it. It takes you a little while to realize like, oh, it's a little bit too beautiful to be real. It's a little bit too much. Too much of a
to be
good
real
thing.
For this context.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's real elsewhere. And
that's it. And the first clip that you're referring to, that was from within the Larose National Park. So even from a layperson's ear on this bioacoustic information, audio from within the national park, as you said, felt so intense and incredible.
Heaving and fecund.
Completely right.
So intense. Do you know how many species like there is like in that specific audio?
In that specific audio, I can't tell you.
Yeah,
on that
you
one,
don't know that. You would need that.
That's it. The thing with us is like we do like authenticity. So that's one of the reasons why we didn't use the audio from within the national park for Potato Head. We used the audio from a survey of the buffer zones, which represented the fragmented habitats, and in a way that's what's going on in Bali at the moment, and what has gone on since the loss of the Balinese tiger 70 years ago, is through habitat fragmentation. And one of the interesting things we were talking about before is how something like Potato Head responds to its context. So, the habitat was already highly fragmented when Potato Head and the vision evolved here, yet it's through regenerative programs, beach cleanups, mangrove explorations that you guys are running, that is a response to, an already damaged environment, and it's about trying to find ongoing flourishing within a damaged environment, to broadly quote Donna Haraway. And what's happening in Bukit Lawang as an ecotourism hub for North Sumatra is again a response to the environment that they have. And the beautiful thing about a lot of the areas that we go to, there's always an ecotourism adjunct to it, because there's so much interest for people to understand and explore and have the intimacy with these environments, that there are really a lot of the time quite savvy, sympathetic and sensitive ecotourism operators there that are turning poachers or loggers into guides and hotel staff. And we know so many guides that used to be poachers, that used to be loggers.
That's what, like, I was listening to something about jungle keepers recently, and like that's exactly what they were explaining also, is like part of their conservation effort was turning a lot of the poachers into now protectors of the land, and it feels like that's just a common thread into a lot of it feels like it's part of a lack of resources, and that could be like diverted into becoming something that is totally positive.
100%. It's economic opportunity, and every single time, if the economic opportunity can come from protecting the ecosystem instead of harming the ecosystem, of course local and indigenous communities every single time are so proud to say that they used to be a poacher, but now they're a custodian of the forest.
The choice is easy, right? It's kind of like if you have the same economic opportunity.
It's the economic pressures that drive people to extract in unsustainable ways, for sure.
And so like these soundscapes of audio, like I saw that you did also something with like the Barbican Center, right? It's got like a similar kind of format, or was it like slightly different? Because I saw that it was played there, and just the location is always amazing. So
yeah, I mean, you know the Barbican so well.
No, talking about amazing brutalist spaces.
I mean, we have an affinity with it.
There, I can see that. No, that was a project with a collaborator of ours who was running a series of symposium linking biodiversity, future environmental efforts, and technology. So Deep was just a part of that program, which we were, obviously very happy to be in great company.
And I think the footage that you're referring to was super beautiful, because while Elliot was doing the sound check for the
that's exactly
recordings, the London Symphony Orchestra were finishing up in the background. So you had people tuning their violins alongside this rich audio from the Amazon.
It's the clash that make it like so powerful. Like it's so unexpected in that setting, and I think that's what we tried to do here also. It's kind of like to like create that clash of unexpected setting that make you pay way more attention to it. And so like what are the next projects for you now? So like you're here, you did like I think a long time like just like traveling, did a bit in the jungle. Here, I think you're going to Australia, and then after that, what's next? Like, what are the next projects, or like the?
Yeah, we're working on a few direct projects, and then some bigger, more long-term transitions in how Deep operates. So as we said, the first few years was really about learning, experimenting, and finding our way, and finding a new way to engage with biodiversity. And through that, we made beautiful cultural connections. We're currently working on a collaboration with GR10K to essentially make a field tailoring. So what do outerwear, merino base layers, and trekking pants look like through a radicalized Italian utilitarian brand's perspective and design intention, which is really beautiful. We're making this essentially an all black tailored outfit for the jungle.
Big fan of the brand.
Amazing. Those guys are great. So that's like a really kind of direct way of manifesting the work that we do into a cultural space. We're also pushing very heavily our continuing work in the Jurua and around the Arapaima supply chain and the Arapaima community value chain as a way of supporting the sales of the community extracted Arapaima over commercially extracted Arapaima. So we're essentially looking at ways of turning the biodiversity data that we've collected, both acoustic, visual, and more so moving into geospatial systems with our partner Atlas of Change, and looking at, can we be providing a form of bespoke biodiversity monitoring for companies? For example, Rick Owens has been using Arapaima in some of the couture outfits for a number of years now.
How is it used exactly? Like I have like a rough idea, but it's kind of like, so it's used as like a leather.
It's a leather. Right? The scaled skin is used as a leather, and that leather is a byproduct of the use of the flesh for the commercial food industry.
So it's food first, and then after that, like, because there's some species where you can't do both, right? It's kind of like I discovered this like in the past, but rabbits, for example, are used either for flesh or either for the fur, but like never both, except in France, where they develop their own species that is like both.
Edible
And is
yeah, okay.
and it's a program from the French government. So it's kind of like it's directly because the trade is so big there that they introduce and they bred a specific species for that. But sometimes we have the feeling that like a species is going to be like used for both, but it's not exactly the case. So for this specific fish, you can do both.
Yeah. So well, the primary use of the arapaima in a commercial context is the meat for a food source, and it's more and more becoming like a hot ticket item in, like, you know, Michelin restaurants in Rio or Sao Paulo, and we're trying to support that value chain through, you know, proving again this qualitative data in order to support the value of supporting community-led extraction. And the skin is a complete byproduct of the use of the meat.
And incredibly beautiful. So if there are any young designers who want to get in touch to use the product, do let us know.
Yeah, I mean, for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, moving more into how do we create a holistic approach to this data that, like we were talking about, the projects we've done involving data and AI analysis have been very specific so far, and very much driven towards the environmental space and supporting environmental direct action and impact, plus the cultural outcomes that we can leverage off that. But we want to be creating a holistic approach to biodata and the integration of AI analysis over the top of it, and we want to create touch points for you know, consumers to be engaging with this, the general public to be engaging with this. So to demystify it, make it far less complex, and to allow people to engage with their own collection of biodata and their own analysis of biodata in very simple ways, so that they can gain a greater sense of, you know, whether it be just understanding what a plant or animal species is in their backyard, through to, you know, instigating small-scale community bioanalysis projects. So really to empower that at a consumer level or a community level.
Yeah, I used the example yesterday of like the Batman tech, but it's kind of like there's that aspect that if you like link all the specific data of like a lot of different individuals, then you could have like that massive amount and like really empower it. Because right now you're doing this like on the ground with like really specific project.
It's really siloed data at the moment.
Yeah. So it's kind of like it's very limited, even if you have like the tools are behind, but it's still like it's something that merits to be more democratized.
Yeah, exactly. We're all citizen scientists.
That's amazing. Hey, seriously, thank you so much for being with us. Like, really, really happy that you're staying here, that we're doing this project. I hope we're going to be able to like explore more of these sounds and like create more experiences like this. Thank you so much.
Isaac, thank you very much.
Thanks, Isaac. Appreciate you.
Thanks,
Appreciate you,
Potato
Potato
Head.
Head.